In this short video, you will get familiar with the functionality of the Cashflow module. It's never been easier to set up a precise and flexible cash flow than with this revolutionary mechanism. So let's get started with the Cashflow module and set up the cash flow in Settings, Cashflow Setup, with 3 elements that define your production on an abstract timeline. The first element are the milestones. Milestones are single important events in your project, like the first day of principal shooting, end of shooting, delivery, or whatever you define as an important milestone. Create a milestone by double-click and give it a name. Drag it on the timeline to move it. Next to the milestones, you have the phases. With phases, you define the time spans for various stages of your production, like shooting, post-production, editing, or again, whatever you consider as an important phase. Create phases by double-click. Define the number of days it contains as well as the number of workdays. Both numbers will automatically create variables. We recommend setting up the shooting days variable like that. You can also attach phases to a milestone, so if a milestone is moved, phase will move along as well. The third group of elements on the timeline are the processes. Unlike milestones, processes are not single events, but series of events, like for instance, recurring payments, like crew payments, or payments by a fund or institution. Create a process by clicking on the plus sign. Decide whether the process should be set up with events as a percentage of a total, or events that calculate costs accrued up to their date. Create events by double-click. Add a payment delay if you believe there will be one, and attach the events to a milestone. You see that you actually get something like a project schedule on a timeline. We now only have to add one single date, and every element on the timeline will get a date as well. And if something changes in the planning of your production, you will not have to change every single cash flow definition in your budget, but you can centrally control everything from this settings dialog. After you are done with the setup, you can use these elements in the budgets and financing plans to assign cash flow rules to the accounts. Let's see how this works. First, open the budgeting module and highlight the account you want to adjust in cash flow. Now click the small blue pen symbol next to cash flow in the macro area. You see there are 3 ways to define a cash flow rule: milestone-based, process-based, or simply a fixed date. Choose milestone-based for costs that are linked to certain milestones. For example, you can schedule the camera rental payment in 2 installments, 50% each, 7 days before shooting begins, and a second one for another 50%, 7 days after the end of shooting. Choose process-based for costs that recur. For example, crew payment. You can limit a process to a certain phase by adding the phase to it. Note that a green circle indicates this account has cash flow data, which you can check in the macro panel. Now let's create a new cash flow set. Go to the Cashflow module and click the plus symbol. Choose a cash flow name, which budget plan or cost report to use as expenses, and which financing plan to use as income source, and then click OK. If your cash flow is empty, you need to define cash flow rules for your expenses and financing sources first. Also note the red alert boxes down here that indicate whether there are expenses or incomes without cash flow definitions. Add a credit line to your cash flow by pressing this button here. Last but not least, you can set your cash flow display options here.